If the leader is muddled, then they're in turn going to create lack of clarity versus having people being able to do an alignment, the purpose of the person aligned with the purpose of the organization. That's where the energy is. And that's really what I'm trying to do, is give people the ability to take this mysterious thing, put a name on it, harness it, and put it to work for good. And by the way, I should say that the way I define purpose is it is by definition good.
Welcome to the Science of Leadership, the podcast dedicated to helping you become a better leader. Here, you'll gain valuable knowledge, hear inspiring stories, and learn the scientific principles that promote exceptional leadership. I'm Tom Collins, your host, and I'm thrilled to have you join us on this journey to becoming a better leader. Today, I'm glad to welcome Kevin McCarthy as my guest. Kevin holds an MBA from the University of Virginia's Darden School of Business and is the Chief Leadership Officer of On Purpose Partners. He's been writing and speaking about the concept of purpose for decades, including multiple books. You won't want to miss his tips for becoming a better leader by leading on purpose. Kevin, thank you for joining me today on the Science of Leadership.
Well, it's great to be with you, Tom. Thanks for having me.
Well, let's get right into today's topic. The people at Harvard Business Publishing have referred to purpose-driven leadership as, quote, doing well by doing good. You've written a lot about the idea of purpose-driven leadership and being on purpose as a leader. When you talk about living and leading on purpose, what do you mean by that?
Well, first of all, let me just clarify that I don't believe we're purpose-driven. I believe we're purpose-called. So I have a very different view from Harvard or Rick Warren, who wrote The Purpose-Driven Life. And so I'm a contrarian relative to the purpose-driven movement that's out there. The reason being is the purpose is within us, and usually driving is something that is driving us. It's compelling us, if you will. Now, I can appreciate the fact that our purpose is something that is there. It's innate. It's just in who we are, if you will. And that as a result, you can't drive it. You have to respond to it, or it doesn't drive us. We respond to it. So we answer the call to be on our purpose is really the difference, if you will. And the other part of it is because it's innate. I often think of it as spiritual DNA. You're a scientist, so we know that there's physical DNA. Well, I like to think that the spiritual world and the physical world sort of mirror one another. They coexist. Therefore, if there's a physical DNA, why shouldn't there be a spiritual DNA? And so it's really looking at it and trying to understand the genome structure, if you will, of that spiritual DNA, which is why I work so deeply with individuals and organizations on clarifying their purpose so they can be on their purpose rather than off their purpose.
Yeah. So if I'm hearing you, being on purpose is really tapping into that thing, that innate part of us for which we are, as you said, called, that we're made for. Is that right?
Yeah. I mean, do you think about it this way? Does your DNA drive you?
Yeah. Without getting too much into nature versus nurture and and environment versus genetics, certainly it heavily informs who we are and what we do, and even to the point of how we behave and perhaps think. Yeah.
Yeah. And so we have then a choice to respond to that or not. We can choose to respond. We have the free will, if you will, to respond to it, to answer that or to not, to deny it or to receive it.
Yeah. Okay. It's almost sort of like what we would call in the field of genetics, epigenetics, so that when we're exposed to certain stimuli, our different proteins and mechanisms are upregulated or downregulated. And so that depending on the situation we're in, our DNA may actually, in a sense, not DNA specifically, but the products of the DNA respond differently to that. So that's an interesting concept.
You're in the deep end of the pool relative to me on that one.
Well, as we're talking about this on purpose, some of our listeners may be wondering, and I wanted to ask you this. There are a lot of books out there that cover purpose and what people or organizations are trying to do or things of that nature. A couple of popular ones that I can think of are Bill George wrote True North, Simon Sinek's, Start with Why. Is this concept different? If so, how's it different? Is it similar? How does leading on purpose differ or mirror those sorts of things?
Well, first of all, I started writing about on purpose in the late 80s. So I'm preceding all of those people that you just mentioned, including even the Purpose-Driven Life with Rick Warren's book. What makes it different, the true north concept, is that there's something outside of you that you're orienting towards.
Mm-hmm.
And again, I go that there's something on the inside. So it's if you will, it's more like a gyroscope than a compass.
Okay.
And then with regards to the start with why, that's basically saying I'm going to start with my purpose. And that's a very, I would agree with that in the sense that why and purpose are very related. Now, purpose has many facets one of which is answering this question, why do I exist, as either an individual or an organization? And then from that perspective, you are able to, once you've clarified your purpose, now you can create the strategy, structures, and alignments so that you can give it expression so you're on your purpose. And that's sort of the simplest explanation I can give for it.
Okay. All right. That makes sense to me. Um, as we think about leading on purpose and this concept that we're talking about today, do you have a good story that you could share, from your experience that really demonstrates what that looks like?
I do. I'll tell you, there's a couple actually, meaning two people that are married. At the time I met them, they were not married. But there's a guy named Dave Zervos and his wife now, named Barbara Zervos. Dave was the CEO of Husqvarna North America. He read The On Purpose Person probably 25 years ago. That's my first book. And it just sort of, he took to it. And so he would buy copies by the cases. We'd get a call and he'd buy them by the case. We'd ship them to him. And what I found out with Dave was he was using the book as one, for him personally, it was transformational to talk about his purpose and then how to organize one's life around your purpose. And then he started using the book to hand it out to either vendors that he worked with or with potential people he was hiring or team leadership. At the time, Husqvarna was about a $28 million business in the US. He eventually grew it to be about $1 billion company. And he says it's because of the principles that are in the On Purpose Person and the On Purpose Business. And I should say that those two books are standalone, but they work together. So they're an integrated set, if you will.
Mm-hmm.
And so Dave talks about that. But one of the funny stories about it is one day I'm in my office at about 5:30, my phone rings. I pick up the phone and a woman says, "Hey, how many books have you written? I got to get as many of them you have. I've got a job interview coming up and I just read your On Purpose Person book. The CEO sent it to me. Love it. I want to know everything you're doing. And I'll call you back in 2 weeks. Here's my number. Here's my Federal Express. Boom. I drop it FedEx. She's got it the next day. And so 2 weeks later, she calls, and this was Barbara, who's now his wife. She gets the job hired as a VP of marketing at Husqvarna in North America, which does primarily power tools, outdoor power tools. She says, I've got to get you up here to meet Dave. I do some events with them. We hit it off. And I'm sitting at dinner one night and I'm thinking, Dave is a widower. Barbara's divorced. There's good chemistry here if these two will pay attention to it. Well, 2 years later, they do get engaged and married, and they've been just great personal friends ever since. And they still recommend my books. Dave now, he left as the CEO of Husqvarna. He came to see me. I was traveling through Orlando where I live and said, Kevin, I'm kind of, at a little bit of a loss here career wise. And I said, Dave, you know what? Are you familiar with Vistage? And he goes, yeah. I said, you'd be a great Vistage chair. And he goes, well, I was in Vistage, as a CEO. And so Dave is now a Vistage chair, and he's won their highest awards that they have. Sort of, I call it the Heisman Trophy of Vistage. Dave's won that award and this award. Now he's the chair for the Carolinas for other chairs. So just an amazing story of a really great couple and a great guy, and how he applied this in his business and in his life, and how this transformation has occurred. And by the way, his 2-word purpose statement, I do 2-word purpose statements, is liberating greatness. And so, Dave's just a guy who's, if you ever get a chance to meet him, he's just really an upbeat, friendly, smart, good man who just cares about people deeply.
Well, that's a ringing endorsement. Maybe some point down the road
So
I can get him.
I call that my first on purpose marriage.
Maybe at some point I can get him to come on the Science of Leadership. Sounds like he's an interesting chap.
Love to introduce you to him. He's just such a great guy.
Yeah. I've been thinking about our conversation coming up, and been thinking about the difference between being a highly intentional person, that a person guided by a clear purpose, and being a leader guided by purpose. And so because I think those two aren't necessarily the same thing. And so I was thinking about myself and how would I characterize myself. And so I think I'm somebody, if I look back across my life, I've always been someone with a deep sense of purpose that really has shaped how I navigate my life. As I thought back on it, people have told me I'm intimidating or things of that nature. And so as I've thought about that, I think it's made me wonder if it's because I have really felt that I have this purpose, that there is something, really that I have this target, this direction that I'm going and know what I'm supposed to be doing. If that has, in a sense, created this feeling of me being intense or something like that. And so when people see someone who's really driven by a sense of purpose, I think maybe perhaps they don't actually know what to do with it. And so maybe if they are not a person who is used to thinking about purpose or recognizes that they have a purpose and are guided by that, then that can be intimidating or threatening or something of that nature. But I think that it's different when it comes to leaders. Like we flip from the personal to the leader role, right? I think that people really are looking for leaders who have identified the purpose and who are pursuing the purpose. I think there's a sense of security in that, and it draws people into what we're trying to do as leaders. Anyway, does that seem reasonable as somebody who obviously has spent a lot of time thinking about purpose and leaders and purpose and all that? Does that seem reasonable to you?
Well, the way let me just maybe add some thoughts or some concepts around what you're describing. And I don't want to get too far ahead here, but if you really look at the on purpose concept, there are really within it, there are four principles that are at work. Think of it as, on purpose is kind of a white light that you shine through a prism. And when you shine it through that prism, it breaks it into the spectrum. And on that spectrum are these primary colors. Let's just say, forget the gradients in between. But if you think about purpose as sort of the red, that's the heart issue that we have that's there. And that's our state of being.
Mm-hmm.
Where the blue is the mind's eye, so sort of blue sky thinking, trying to, where am I going? That's the vision part. And then missions are yellow because this is the day-to-day activity where the sun rises and the sun sets. And then values are in the blend. Values sit between the head and the heart, the red and the blue, and they're purple, and they're in the throat and in the gut. And the reason that they're there is that values are they sort of regulate between the heart and the head, if you will. And so what happens is when your heart, your head, and your hands are aligned within your values, you are now on your purpose. Now, so this is the language of leadership and strategy: purpose, vision, mission, and values. It is extraordinarily confused, as is purpose driven versus on purpose, if you will, from my perspective. I mean, I've invested the better part of at this point 35 years of my life living with this stuff every day. And the tragedy that I see out there is whether it's just the variety of material that's printed that is basically sending people, in my opinion, in the wrong direction. And so what I'm really looking at is if I can help people know their purpose, what's on their heart, their state of being, so that whether you're at rest or whether you're actively doing, you're good. That's the case. Okay. Now, when you have somebody like yourself, where your heart, your head, and your hands are aligned within your values, it can be intimidating to people because, at some level, you know what to say yes to, what to say no to, and you also, and that can be intimidating there in of itself, because you're going to say no, which can offend some people because they'd like to be a little more friendly, if you will, about it. Now, this doesn't have to do with friendliness necessarily. That's almost a personality type, if you will, in terms of extrovert, introvert, and how you interact with people, which is a whole different thing, if you will. And so what you're really looking at is, with leadership, they talk about leadership being lonely. It's because the leader understands why I'm here, where I'm going, how I want to get there, and what is important along the way, that I'm not going to violate any values. And so that combination, where most people are muddled. And so all of a sudden, when you have this muddled reality around us, then we're intimidated by somebody, or we can embrace somebody. For instance, if I'm facing an illness of some sort and I go to a physician like yourself, and they are trained, educated, and experienced in this, they know better than I what is going on. And so at that point, I'm not intimidated, I'm welcoming that. But if you get with a colleague who's in the same field and you start to argue over things, then you might find that actually that might be an intimidating conversation for that other person. You see, so at some level, it depends on the level of knowledge, the circumstance under which one's in. The fact is that a good leader, like a good physician, should have a good bedside manner in many ways, although not always. I mean, do I really care if I'm having cardiac surgery, whether my surgeon has good bedside manner or whether he or she has really good hands and knowledge and experience?
Sure.
So in that sense, I'm going to see them maybe at the intake and the outtake, and other than that, I might not see the surgeon ever again.
Yeah, that's helpful. Thanks for filling that out more. And I'm reminded, for those who are listening, I've read at least a couple of Kevin's books, including the On Purpose Person and the Chief Leadership Officer book, and recommend those to you. But he has a little figure that really lays out these purpose, mission, vision, values to help you be able to.
There he is up here in the corner.
Oh, yes. Yeah.
The heart, the head, the hands. I call him the On Purpose Pal. And the On Purpose Pal is designed to help people. I mean, interestingly, Tom, it's easier for me to explain purpose, vision, mission, and values to second graders than it is to CEOs, because the second
That's
graders don't have preconceived notions.
right. Right.
And the CEO does, because they've built maybe a strategy. Because this is, again, the language of strategy. So what happens is somebody built a strategy around it, and I'm walking in saying, "Wait a minute, you're using purpose and mission simultaneously, or synonymously rather, and they're different. One is deep and heartfelt, and the other one is just kind of, here's what we do. Go
Yeah.
build widgets."
Mhm.
And so whenever I get with, and it's funny, I look at Fortune 500 companies from time to time. Their statement of strategy and purpose, vision, mission, and values, and usually they'll state our purpose, and then it says our vision is, or our mission is, and it's like, it's not a purpose, it's a mission statement, and so
Yeah.
they use them. And it's just one of those little idiosyncrasies that kind of drives me crazy. Doesn't bother most other people, but for me, who's deep into it, I look at it and say, "Ugh," right off the bat, I know that there's, if the leader is muddled, then they're in turn going to create lack of clarity
Yeah.
around, versus having people being able to do an alignment. So one of the big principles you may remember in the On Purpose Business Person is the purpose of the person aligned with the purpose of the organization. That's where the energy is. Everything else, payrolls, benefits, working conditions, all of that sort of stuff I'm not saying it's not important, but it pales in comparison to knowing that my life and my work in this organization makes a difference, and
Yeah.
I'm living in my calling. I'm doing what I was put on earth to be about, in this work environment, in this marriage, in raising these children. I mean, there's various
Sure.
missions where we're
Mhm.
giving our expression.
Yeah. Yeah. I think certainly in a lot of areas of society, I can say in a lot of medical institutions, that alignment, there's there's a lack of alignment, right, between what the organization says and how they behave with regard to purpose, and the purpose that those of us in medicine feel that we have, and the reason that we're doing what we're doing. Those are misaligned a lot of the times in my experience and observation. Perhaps there's some utopia out there, but I haven't yet seen it. And that's causing so many problems, I think, with regard to our healthcare system and the burnout that we see and all those sorts of things. So I think this concept of on purpose is really important.
Well, you have to recognize, when the purpose of the person and the purpose of the organization are aligned, that's the high energy. It's never perfect, okay? But the truth is, individuals don't know their purpose. Then they may not even be curious about their purpose, let alone purpose, vision, mission, and values. So you start off with that, and then you have organizations that are confused about purpose, vision, mission, and values, and therefore the people that are looking for it may have difficulty finding it, because it's not being communicated. Or if it is there and it is being communicated, you tend to find that those are the organizations that outperform significantly. I mean, Jim Collins' book Good to Great, in many ways, provided the data and the research of why certain organizations outperform. And basically, what he was saying is, there's this black box. I like to call that purpose, vision, mission, and values, where something goes on, is the way he described it, because he didn't have the language of purpose, vision, mission, and values. And in that black box, what they're really doing is they're creating culture, and they're creating, the business things of systems, computers, accounting, all of that is it's just science of business. It's
Mhm.
pretty basic stuff. Okay. It is the integration of these things around something bigger and better that really comes around, and to the idea in the Chief Leadership Officer book, contributing to the common good, or the commonwealth of humanity. Most people would love to be a contributor to the common good of their fellow man or woman, and so as a result, we're frustrated because we don't feel like we're doing that. Our life is not living up to its potential. But we have a responsibility also to understand that, wait a minute, if I'm frustrated, I can blame the government, I can blame the insurance companies, I can blame the hospital, I can blame my marriage, I can play the blame game. But until I'm willing to take deep responsibility for understanding and clarifying who I am, then I I can more likely identify where I'm going to fit and where I'm going to thrive.
Yeah. Well, I think that really hits on why why talk about this idea of on purpose, right? And why is it important? And so I think you've really clarified that for us to a good degree. Do you have a story that you could share that really shows how leading on purpose had a significant impact on either your leadership or that of somebody else?
Yeah, I'm going to go to, I told you about the business guy. I'm going to go to a woman I met 20 years ago in business, but she was, just a sort of a middle manager person, if you will. We lost track of each other for 20 years, and she showed up on a webinar I do called Refine Your Purpose, where people that have used this tool that I have to find their purpose, their two-word purpose. And she showed up, and she's now retired, living in a retirement facility with 500 other people. And she said, my life is not very good. I'm trying to make it better. And we started talking about her two-word purpose, which, gosh, I forget what her two-word purpose is right now. But in the process of having the conversation with her, we unpacked it and we talked about it. And she said, I just don't feel very welcomed or loved. And after sort of talking about her two-word purpose statement, there was almost a jolt of energy that came into her. And the next month she showed up and she said, I have to tell you, my life is 180 degrees different from what it was a month ago. And she said, I've been embracing my purpose. I'm reaching out to other people. I'm having lunches and dinners with other people. She said, where I was always eating by myself because I'm a widow. And she said, my life has just suddenly become filled and joyful, and I'm no longer depressed. And that sort of a thing. And so whether it's a retired person, or I think even a 15-year-old or a 20-year-old who's worried about what's going, is the world going to melt down because of climate change or something like that, some existential crisis, whatever it may
Yeah.
be that you're facing, that, at some level, you don't control that, but you do control your response to it. And you can control what you can control. And so as a result, rather than letting your identity be lost out there, own it deeply. And that's really what, at some level, that's what I'm trying to do, is help people own their identity.
Yeah. I think that when we, in my observation, when we feel that we have identified why we exist, which is, I mean, like that's, as I've looked at this in my own life, and I mentor other people and try to help them in this regard, coaching and whatnot. A lot of people don't know why they're here. I think it's the minority of people who have done the hard work of trying to figure that out. Why am I here? What is my big purpose? But I'll tell you, once again, in my experience, once you have that consolidated, crystallized, it does help you to know what you're supposed to be doing in a much better way. It helps you to be more authentic in who you are, and to know where you should and shouldn't invest your time. And it makes so much difference, I think, or can, in one's life. Certainly for me, when I figured out what I refer to as my oxygen, it changed a lot. It changed a lot for me. So
One of the traps that people fall into a lot is they think that their job, their marriage, their children are their purpose.
yeah,
And those are missions. Those are things that you are about doing. And there are relationships. I mean, they're important relationships. But your purpose is, because, like I said, Dave Zervas's purpose statement is liberating greatness. What does that mean? I mean, that's sort of an X and a Y chromosome, if you will. Now, there's a generic start to it that says, I exist to be liberating greatness. So it's your past, your present, and your future. It does not have these constraints of platform, if you will. We get to
mhm,
create the platform by seeing a vision, figuring out what to do to live that out. And so a lot of people think that this alignment is their big purpose, where in fact it may be their big vision of what they're moving towards, working, aspiring towards, as opposed to, because at some level, for you, you wanted to be a doctor, so you go to you do all the stuff, you take the GMATs, you do, or not the GMATs, the MCATs, you go to school, you apply, you get in, you do your residencies, you do the school, you do the residencies, you do the fellowships, you do all these sorts of things. This is my big purpose. And then all of a sudden you achieve it and you're like, wait a minute, it's good, but there's something else, there's something missing in my life, and you start to look around
yeah,
and you realize, well, what is that that's missing? And that's the purpose part. When most people say there's something missing in my life, what it is they haven't really gone back to that very simple two-word purpose statement of why I'm here.
yeah,
And whether you're in your 20s, 30s, 40s, 70s, 80s, or 90s, you can still give it expression differently, but you still
yeah,
give it expression.
yeah. I mean, the way I describe this to folks, people, and just as you say, people lock in that their purpose is whatever role they are in, whatever social or professional or whatever kind of context they're in, that's their purpose. My purpose is to be a doctor. No, what I tell folks is your purpose should reach far beyond whatever your professional endeavors are. It should be something you can do as a guy who's mowing lawns, a woman who's, making pottery, whatever it is. Like pick any kind of role or what have you. When your purpose is crosses all that. It's not just, well, because what happens if you lose your ability to be a doctor? That's the question I ask people. Well, if that's your purpose and you lose the ability to be a physician, does that mean you have no purpose? And usually when I frame it starkly like that, they can stop and go, well, no. Okay, so let's put that aside. Let's really drill down on why are you doing what you're doing? Maybe it's because you're trying to help people be better in some larger context. You can do that in any sort of domain. Maybe it's you're trying to help society be better, whatever it may be, right? And so usually when I frame it like that, it helps people to think through it in a little bit better way.
Absolutely. That's really good advice you're giving out in your coaching to do that, because, a lot of times, for women, when their children leave the home and they're an empty nest, now what?
Yeah.
For a lot of people, particularly for men, when they retire, the death rate within the first 18 months is very high because they no longer have a reason for being, quote unquote.
Hmm.
Um, and so we've wrapped our identity in what we do as opposed to who we are, and 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 so that's really a dangerous place to be.
Yeah.
For anybody who's reaching retirement or out of a job right now and they feel like they're worthless, you're not worthless.
Hmm.
You just have a different place of expression for that worth to be expressed. That's all it's coming about. But you have an innate value.
Yeah. I've been thinking and reading quite a bit about, as I sort of alluded to, this idea of purpose and on purpose isn't new, certainly to me. And so I've thought a lot about that, talked a lot about it to different people, mentees and people I coach, and read a lot about it, trying to get more, a better handle on it and what's the literature say. And I usually like to try to share some of what people have found with regard to research on these sorts of topics. So you may know this, but Patrick Hill and Nicholas Turiano studied this idea of having a purpose in your life and whether it was associated with mortality. And so those people who are identified in the study as purposeful had a 15% lower risk of death during this longitudinal study. That is to say, those people who lived with purpose lived longer. So they studied them for, I don't remember how many years, right? So they followed them for a certain number of years. And those people who lived more purposeful lives and had a purpose had a 15% lower risk of death in that study period.
Yeah, I'm Dan Buettner, who wrote the book Blue Zones, if you're familiar with that. He also did some similar study in terms of people that live to be 100, into their hundreds.
Hmm.
There's these areas where they are, and at the base of his pyramid, if you will, of health, is purpose is at the core of it. And basically, their studies show that people that have even a sense of purpose, which to me, a sense of purpose is like having a smell of a steak, but never getting to take a bite of it. I mean, I want people to have the full damn steak. I want them to
Yeah.
put it in their mouth and eat the thing, okay, as opposed to just the smell of it. But he talks about that the people that have a sense of their purpose, and they define purpose as a reason to get up in the morning, which is it's a very light definition of it, but for the average person, that's not bad. But that they have an extended life period of I think 7 to 10 years, and quality and quantity of life.
Yeah. And obviously that's the individual level, but if we take it to those people that are listening, who are thinking about from the leadership level, there are other things that we really need to consider too. So unless people have been living under a rock, they should know that millennials and Gen Z are much more focused on purpose and meaning when it comes to their professional lives, and much more so than they are with salaries or things of that nature. So that's really important when we start thinking about leading those demographics. But also, if you look at digging more into the science of this thing, a lot of studies have shown that leading with purpose and purpose being a part of the organizational culture really is important, and it results in a number of things, better performance overall. But there was this recent, I think it was just published last year, this recent meta-analysis. So basically, they took a bunch of studies that had been done on this idea, and they analyzed those all together in a really rigorous manner, and that was published in the Journal of Administrative Science. But the authors looked at 58 studies, pooled them together, and found that purpose, those who lead with purpose, results in 5 major organizational benefits. So the first is increased work engagement among those that you're leading. The second is enhanced organizational commitment, so people are more likely to stay at your organization. Third is improved employee productivity and effectiveness. The fourth is increased collaboration and innovation. And finally, enhanced overall organizational performance. So, Kevin, it seems pretty clear to me, based on the data, other than things that we've been saying already, that being, as you would say, on purpose leaders is really highly beneficial.
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of like I've often described it. This equation that I talked about before that I call the on-purpose principle is sort of Einstein had E equals mc squared as the theory of relativity, and I think of the on-purpose principle as the theory of relationships, which is the purpose of the person aligned with the purpose of the organization. And I said that's where the energy is, and all 5 of those effects that you described are the reality of high alignment. So yeah, I would concur with that study absolutely, because I mean, in the clients that I've been able to do this work with, we see higher engagement, we see greater collaboration, we see better performance, we see the idea of a happier workplace, a more productive workplace, all of these things that are missing. And this is why, for me, the tragedy of whenever we misdefine purpose, how we're looking for all of these things, and yet we have our core principle that is the source of all of that is confused. and even to the younger people that you were describing, the Gen X and the Gen Ys, one of the things that I find that's, again, one of these tragedies out there is misidentification. In other words, a lot of people in this generation in our political structure reinforces this with things like identity politics. But there's a difference between one's identity, which is their reason for being, and their identifiers, which may be their political affiliation, their sexual orientation, their race, their creed, their nationality or ethnicity, what football team they cheer for. All of these brands that are vying for our identity are actually just simply identifiers that we choose. And so as a result, when you confuse an identifier for an identity, you now have basically an empty core to a hollow core to the person, because they have a false god, if you will, in the middle of who they are.
Mhm. Okay, that's interesting differentiation I hadn't thought of. So you kind of spelled out a list of identifiers. What would you say is the definition of then identity?
Well, identity is knowing why you're here. It is really that's why I do these two-word purpose statements, because again,
Mhm.
I think one of the things, and I'm the first to say this, okay, see this wedding ring on my hand? I put it up there. That is a symbol of my marriage. Okay, marriage is a covenant relationship. It's a mysterious relationship. Anybody that's married, whether they're male or female, well, I understand that there's a wonderful benefit to a great marriage. And my wife and I are celebrating 41 years this April. So I'm blessed with a great marriage. But it is not my marriage. It is a symbol of my marriage. So a two-word purpose statement is a symbol of something mysterious. But
Mm.
if you wanted, the best analogy I can give is many centuries ago, a guy named Benjamin Franklin was flying a kite in a key as a scientist, and this thing called electricity. And it was like, whoa, there's this thing out there that we don't really quite understand. And I want to say that purpose is a lot like electricity. It's out there. It's always been in you. But once you sort of name it, now you can begin to harness it
Mhm.
and maybe put it into useful function. And that's really what I'm trying to do, is give people the ability to take this mysterious thing, put a name on it, harness it, and put it to work for good. And by the way, I should say that the way I define purpose is it is by definition good. It is not evil. So that there is a internal control. So you can use everything I teach to create alignments, strategy, structures, and alignments. You can take everything I have, and you can create evil with it. Okay.
Mm.
But if your purpose by definition is good and you're on purpose, see, that would just be an off purpose structure. In fact, a highly integrated, highly high integrity structure that is off purpose can do really bad evil things. But at the core of it, when your purpose is good by definition, then you are striving to serve the common good.
So we've talked about being on purpose, what that looks like, what that means, why it's important. We covered that, and your experiences and all of your, not all, but sampling of all that you've learned and seen, and the literature on it. And you were just hitting on this, and so it makes me wonder, what are the practical tips that you can give our listeners to help them, you know, lead and be on purpose?
Well, the first is clarify your purpose, and then clarify your vision. Why am I here? Vision, where do I want to go? Clarify how you want to get there, which is usually most people have a really good idea of that. Most people have a good vision and a good sense of their missions, what they want to do, and then their values. So to me, purpose and values are the most difficult part to define. And then basically use all the skills, talents, and everything you've learned, whether it's basically time management skills. I mean, these are some pretty basic things, life skills we
Mhm.
learn, how to manage your money, and begin to invest your time, your money, your resources, your energy, rather than spending your time. Invest your time, because when you invest, you're not necessarily looking for an immediate return. It's not that sense of self gratification, but it's an investment, knowing that if I do this today, tomorrow, whether it's a year from now, 10 years from now, 20 years from now, there will be a return on that investment. And that investment may not just be financial. It may be, I mean, from a psychic point of view, a psychological point of view, there's a psychological return. There's a relationship return. There's a marriage return. There's health returns. So it's really living it out in that regard. Most people have enormous skills. I mean, if you think about it, if somebody actually got up this morning, brushed their teeth, showered, combed their hair, got dressed, and went to work, that is a leader. That person's got good, basic, solid leadership skills to move their life forward. They may not have the title of leader or CEO in their name, but they're leading their life. So they have the basic skills it takes. What's happening is a lot of times they just don't have the basic strategies, because strategies are not, they're optional. We can choose whether we want to have strategies or not, or we can just go about our day. And so one of the things I talk about is that I say that leadership is the ability to overcome the natural decline of gravity, because gravity wants to pull us down. Many people want to pull us down. Leaders resist that gravity, that pull that would decay us. And so that's the sort of thing is the world's always decaying. And so what we want to do is resist that decay.
Yeah.
And part of that is starting with us. From a health point of view, if you're not taking care of your health, then you're going to pay a price for that.
Yeah. So what you're saying is leaders are fighting against the second law of thermodynamics,
You could,
right?
yeah, that's another way of looking at it. Correct.
Well, so you hit on a couple things. So the Center for Creative Leadership, in my readings and things, they put together, the things that drive purpose and so forth. But they also have for leaders basically how you can lead with purpose, how you can improve organizational purpose and things. And that they actually the two things that you offered are really resonant with what they've identified. So they talked about incorporating your mission, vision, and values into really what you're communicating, right? So that there is this alignment, so that everybody knows this is where we're going, this is what we're about, this is why we exist to do what we do, which you said. And I think that as leaders, we got to consistently remind people of why we're doing what we're doing, what our purpose really is, just as you said. And then the second thing, which I actually think probably is more important, and you hit on this in the sense of you said invest the time, but we need to understand what drives those people that we're leading. Get to know our people, right? What is their purpose? Not just are they making the widget or whatever it may be, not purpose in the sense of organizational purpose. This is their role in the organization, but what is it there? And that's what I've tried to do with our faculty, where I am now, is try to help them understand what is your purpose? Why are you really here? It's not to be a nephrologist. Okay. It's not to be a psychologist or whatever it may be. It's something more. So I think the more that we know about our people, the easier it is to reinforce their own sense of purpose. And so I think when people understand that, and then we're able to align it with that overall organizational purpose, that really magic can happen, I think.
Yeah, just to use your example of a nephrologist, because it kind of hits personal with me. I have one kidney. I had two, but one was damaged due to a kidney stone that was undiagnosed, and it lodged, and my kidney on the right side atrophied. So I have a nephrologist, and every time I go to see him, he's looking at my kidney from the health and the statistics in terms of what's going on. I'm looking at it saying, "Hey, I'm a tennis player. I play 3 to 5 times a week, and when I'm out in the tennis court, what do I need to do to be better hydrated?" So I don't pass out, because what will happen is, at a certain point in time, particularly hot days in the summer in Florida, I start to get real lightheaded, and I'm trying to figure out the right combination of Gatorade, water, and everything else. Because he said to me, Gatorade was created by a nephrologist at the University of Florida. Not a bad thing. So I'm constantly picking his brain, not on how to make my kidney better, but how to have the life I want to have. And in the process of that, I am doing better care of my kidney.
Yeah.
So, I'm communicating to him very clearly my motivation for my health and well-being, aside from I want to have a longer life, a marriage, but that tennis 3 to 5 times a week is my health plan to
Yeah.
have all the other things I want to do. I have no delusions of grandeur about being world ranked or anything like that, although I'm a good tennis player. But it's the sort of thing where I'm trying to give that out. Now, if a physician talks to a patient about why do you want to be healthy, and they don't have an answer, their outcome is probably going to be greatly diminished relative to a guy that like me who walks in and says, "I got a tennis match tomorrow and I don't want to pass out. What do I need to do?"
Sure.
And see,
Yeah.
this is that part of, I think, medicine where I think the system between whether it's the government or insurance companies, where they're trying to up productivity,
Hmm.
um, faster visits, is in many ways missing the mark in terms of how to really connect with the patient and their
Yeah.
motivations.
Yeah. Absolutely. I think that's 100% correct. Well, Kevin, any final thoughts before we wrap up our conversation?
Well, one, I've really enjoyed connecting with you again, and it's really neat what you're doing here. So thank you for that. The biggest thing for me is I just cannot encourage people enough to really think deeply about this concept of purpose, because it is truly transformative. And as a result, one of the things that if you're going through an adversity or what I call a tough shift, say it slowly, um, that it is what will sustain you and give you great resilience and strength. Because, we can sit here and talk about the great times and the good times, but it's the dark times. It's the times when we're really down in the dumps, or we feel like nobody loves us, or nobody wants us, or we have no self-worth, or whatever. Purpose is that white light at the end of that tunnel that is shining for you and is there to say, no, you have a reason for being, and let's build your life around that.
Well, I think that's a great way to end off our conversation. Kevin, thank you for being on the Science of Leadership today. I really think it's been great.
Well, thank you for having me. And be on purpose.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of The Science of Leadership. We hope today's discussion has inspired you and given you valuable insights to help you become a better leader. Remember, leadership is about helping those we lead do great things. It's a journey of continual growth and learning. When we embrace that journey with curiosity, courage, and humility, we can confront challenges, overcome barriers, and foster environments where everyone can succeed. If you enjoyed today's episode, be sure to follow or subscribe, leave a comment, and share it with others who are passionate about leadership. Until next week, keep leading with character, competence, caring, and communication. This is Tom Collins. Let's keep growing.